In every war, there are battles fought with guns, tanks, and courage. But there's another kind of battle, one fought with imagination, deception, and illusion. During World War II, as Allied forces fought to liberate Europe, a small group of American soldiers fought a very different kind of war. They were not ordinary men. They were painters, architects, sound engineers, and set designers. Their mission? To trick the German army into believing something that wasn't real. They built inflatable tanks, created fake radio chatter, and blasted recorded battle sounds through giant speakers. Their job was to fool Hitler's forces, and in doing so, save thousands of lives. They called themselves the Ghost Army. The concept of using illusion to confuse the enemy wasn't new. Throughout history, armies had used deception, from fake camps to false flags, to mislead their foes. But in the 20th century, warfare became technological. Radar, aircraft, and coded communications made it harder to deceive the enemy. So the U.S. Army decided to turn to a different kind of expert, artists. In 1944, under the command of Colonel Harry Reeder, the U.S. Army created a new, secret unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Its mission, to stage elaborate battlefield illusions, to make the Germans believe American forces were positioned where they weren't. Only about 1,100 men made up this unique group. To put that in perspective, that's less than 1/10 the size of an infantry division. Yet their presence on the battlefield could make it seem like tens of thousands of troops were marching. They were not ordinary soldiers. They came from art schools like Yale, Cooper Union, and Pratt Institute. They were sculptors, painters, architects, even sound engineers from Bell Laboratories. Among them were young men who would one day become famous. Bill Blass, who would later revolutionize American fashion. Ellsworth Kelly, who would become a celebrated abstract painter. Arthur Singer, who would go on to illustrate for National Geographic. But back then, in 1944, they were just kids, carrying sketchbooks instead of rifles, preparing to use creativity as camouflage. The Ghost Army's weapons looked nothing like traditional ones. Instead of steel and gunpowder, they used rubber, paint, and sound. The engineers designed inflatable tanks, jeeps, and artillery, made of lightweight canvas and rubber, easily folded and transported. A single crew of 4 could inflate a full-sized Sherman tank in less than 30 minutes. Imagine it. A field empty in the morning, and by sunset, an entire armored division appeared out of thin air. From above, Allied reconnaissance pilots couldn't tell the difference. To the Germans, these rubber decoys looked ready for battle. But a convincing illusion wasn't only about what you saw. It was also about what you heard. That's where the sound team came in. At Bell Labs, sound engineers recorded the roars of real tanks and trucks, the grind of treads, the metallic clanks, the distant rumble of engines. They built massive speaker systems capable of projecting sound up to 15 miles away. By layering different recordings, trucks idling, tanks revving, soldiers shouting, they could make it seem like an entire army was on the move. The Germans, listening through the night, believed what they heard. And they often moved their forces to respond to a ghost army that didn't exist. The Ghost Army's deception didn't end with sound and sight. Another group, the Signal Company Special, worked over the airwaves. They studied real divisions' communication habits, the way officers signed off, how messages were timed, even the kinds of mistakes they made. Then they copied them perfectly. They filled the air with fake radio chatter, creating a web of false information. To German intelligence, these transmissions were gold. They intercepted message after message, believing they were tracking real American divisions. But they weren't. They were chasing ghosts. This combination, visual decoys, sound effects, and radio illusion, formed the 3 pillars of the Ghost Army's art. Together, They created entire phantom divisions, capable of fooling even the sharpest enemy observers. The Ghost Army's first test came in France, shortly after D-Day in 1944. As Allied forces struggled to push inland from the beaches, deception became vital. The Germans were watching every move. They believed the Allies might still launch another invasion elsewhere. So, the 23rd was sent to help divert attention and mislead enemy reconnaissance. They set up fake convoys, complete with inflatable tanks and dummy command posts. They blared engine sounds through the night. They even left behind footprints, cigarette butts, and mess kits to make the deception feel real to any German scouts who might inspect the area. When Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes flew overhead, what they saw was convincing. Rows of tanks glinting in the sun, radio trucks sending chatter, soldiers moving below. But none of it was real. The Germans adjusted their defenses, exactly as planned. The deception worked. The Ghost Army's next major challenge came at Brest, a heavily fortified port on the coast of France. In August 1944, Allied forces were preparing to surround and capture it, but they needed to draw German fire away from the real attack. The Ghost Army was sent in. Their mission, to pretend to be an armored division moving toward a different target. So, in fields outside Brest, the illusionists went to work. Within hours, inflatable tanks filled the landscape. The sound engineers looped the hum of engines. Fake messages filled the airwaves. At night, the soldiers lit fires and moved shadows to mimic troop movements. German reconnaissance reported a major buildup of Allied armor, exactly where none existed. The ruse succeeded. German defenses shifted, stretching their lines thinner, allowing the real U.S. divisions to strike where it mattered most. Brest fell, and not a single shot was fired by the Ghost Army. By early 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its end, but the fighting was still fierce. The Allies needed to cross the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier into the heart of Germany. It was heavily defended. A direct assault would be costly. So, the Ghost Army prepared one of their most daring illusions. While General Patton's real troops prepared to cross 20 miles to the south, the Ghost Army set up a massive fake buildup near Waldorf. Inflatable tanks and artillery lined the riverbanks. Sound crews created the noise of bridge building and trucks rolling in. Fake radio signals mimicked an entire division coordinating an attack. For days, German scouts watched from the opposite bank. They reported Allied troop movements and bridge activity, all fabricated. When the real crossing began miles away, the Germans were still waiting for an attack that never came. The operation succeeded with minimal resistance, and thousands of lives were spared. One soldier later recalled, "We fought with rubber and wire, but what we did saved flesh and blood." Though their missions were secret, they were far from safe. The Ghost Army often operated within a few miles of enemy lines. If captured, they would not be treated as prisoners of war. They'd be executed as spies. Still, they carried out more than 20 deception missions from Normandy to the Rhine. They were unarmed, but brave beyond measure. To maintain the illusion, they even acted like soldiers from other divisions, painting insignia on their trucks, wearing the wrong patches, and mingling with real troops to spread rumors. They were not only artists, they were actors in a vast stage play that stretched across Europe. Sometimes their illusions became almost too real. On one occasion, a German artillery battery began firing on their inflatable tanks. The decoys didn't explode, they just deflated. The soldiers laughed until they realized those shells could have easily been aimed at them. When the war finally ended in 1945, the Ghost Army's members went home quietly. They received no medals, no parades, no headlines. Their work remained classified for over 50 years. Even their families never knew the truth. When veterans tried to talk about what they had done, the official response was always the same. That's top secret. It wasn't until the 1990s that historians uncovered the files, revealing the truth about this extraordinary unit. Their contributions had been hidden beneath decades of secrecy. Only then did the world learn how much their illusions had mattered. According to official estimates, their deceptions saved between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied lives. They had turned the tools of war into a performance, one that changed the outcome of battles without ever pulling a trigger. In 2022, nearly 80 years later, the surviving members of the Ghost Army finally received the Congressional Gold Medal, one of America's highest honors. Only a few of them lived to see it. Men in their late 90s, sitting quietly in wheelchairs, smiling as their secret was finally told. Their medals glinted under the light, not for fighting, but for imagining. For proving that courage doesn't always mean charging into gunfire. Sometimes it means standing in a field with a paintbrush and a rubber tank, hoping your lie is strong enough to save lives. Today, the story of the Ghost Army stands as one of the most inspiring examples of creativity under fire. Their techniques have influenced modern warfare, from electronic jamming to radar decoys and even cyber deception. Their legacy continues wherever imagination is used to protect rather than destroy. At museums across America, their sketches, blueprints, and photographs tell a story that sounds impossible, but was entirely true. Paintings done in foxholes, designs scribbled on ration boxes, men who turned art into armor. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing is how they saw beauty even in war. When one artist was asked what it was like to build illusions on a battlefield, he said, "It was strange. We were surrounded by death, but what we created was life. Sound, color, movement. We brought something unreal into a world that had lost its imagination." They were never meant to be remembered. Their work was meant to vanish, like shadows in the fog of war. But now, we remember them. The soldiers who fought with brushes instead of bullets, with rubber instead of steel, and creativity instead of fear. They were the artists who fooled Hitler's army. They were the Ghost Army,